I've always loved a good story. I studied psychology and I came to the conclusion that Jack from Jack and the Beanstalk was delusional, megalomaniacal with delusions of grandeur. I looked deep into fairy tales and I ended up in a place where only the truth exists. And there I found that Prince Charming was a womanizer and a polygamist with multiple lovers, capturing the interests of both Cinderella and Snow White and who knows how many others. I love how a story can make you think. I love the stories that we tell when we drink. But most of all, I love the stories that I can tell to a female. Question. It's about Pinocchio. If Pinocchio were to say that my nose would grow now, and that were false, then our understanding of the mechanics of how his nose grows would indicate that it would grow. But if he were to say that my nose would grow now, and that were indeed true, would it still grow? I did a philosophical analysis of Pinocchio and discovered that the manner in which his nose grows is paradoxical. I went to a place where there is no space and time, and I held discussions with cavemen and ancient Egyptians, and I learned that there is nothing worse than a wasted mind, a broken heart with a broken spark that just won't start. I deconstructed the value of a good story passed from generation to generation as my own grandmother told me stories of pain, freedom, joy, and segregation that I'll one day pass on to my born overseas, full or half African son, none of the African son, as I tell him about how the damage was done. I deconstructed the value of a good story passed from generation to generation as my own grandmother told me stories of pain, freedom, joy, and segregation that I'll one day pass on to my born overseas, full or half African son as I tell him about how the damage was done, how girls have cooties and how not to get a broken heart. Question the necessity of war. Because I want to hear a story that the Israelites and the Philistines agree on, one that transcends celebrated ignorance. Question Cupid, because I want to tell you a story that you love because it breaks your heart. Question Common Sense, because sometimes it's just a little too uncommon. Question the Cabinet, because how do you justify the deregulation of fees, inadequate refugee policies, and cuts to the ABC? Question everything, because if you don't, no one will. So I spent most of last night in anticipation of today, and I spent the most of the last few minutes just being super nervous. And as it is quite evident from my attire, I have an incessant predilection for attention. So when I was asked to come back on stage, naturally I just jumped at the chance. You see, this morning I came here not knowing anyone, but like you, I was drawn and connected to the theme. I am pleased to have met some fantastic people, and I think that we often take for granted that a lot of people will talk about being able to organize events such as these, but it takes a certain caliber of individuals to actually see these ideas blossom into fruition. The truth is, we had quite a lot of talks today, and all of them are deserving of recognition in their own right, and all of them would have connected to us on a different level. I would like to take this time out to personally thank each and every speaker that has stood up here and has shared a little something with us today that has either moved us or inspired us to ask questions not only of ourselves, but of the world. I want to thank Digi Youth Arts for their amazing performance. I want to thank Shane for his creativity. I want to thank Dr. Bella for teaching us about female sexuality. I want to thank Liam for discussing his myths of masculinity. I want to thank James Dale for his super bananas. I want to thank the Women's Circus for encouraging female empowerment. I want to thank everyone who participated in the 1-minute talks because your ideas were truly inspiring. I want to thank Michael Douglas for sharing his thoughts on the right to be forgotten. I want to thank Ben Stokes on educating us about cognitive biases. I want to thank Andy for teaching us about the power of the red frog. I want to thank Kate for sharing his musical ability with us. I want to thank Jane Caro for telling us about the beauty of aging. I want to thank Michael for telling us about effective leadership. I want to thank Steve for helping us understand energy poverty and some of the solutions. I want to thank Robert for earning his face. I want to thank Robbie for sharing his music with us. I want to thank Juanita for rethinking charity. I want to thank Yasmin for teaching us about unconscious bias. I want to thank Antonio for showing us how old mythology is reflected in science. But most importantly, I want to thank you, because without you, events like this would not be possible. Thank you, and continue to question everything, because if you don't, no one will.